easiest way to describe the next 30 minutes is I think you've all been lucky to spend the morning with Sarah and with Zach, who's probably spent a lot of time talking to you about like really big picture, grand stories of great companies. I'm going to, funnily enough, do the inverse and go all the way back down to the bottom of the funnel rather than like big success stories and stories about exits, and go back to this idea that every founder is at some point the product manager, and then try and think through what does a 15-minute APM program look like. For those of you not familiar with APM programs, they're the congratulations, you've joined straight fresh from university and we're going to put you through product management school. So my general goal for the next 15 minutes is going to be to try and give you the most basic framework of what a product manager does. I'm going to try and use that to talk a little bit about how a founder's role in terms of product, what a founder's role is and how that changes over time. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the number one way you will all screw it up. And that's, I say this kind of presumptively because everybody does, everybody will, and that's okay. Mostly we want to just make sure we spot that. I'm seeing a couple things in the chat though before we run through, which is multiple soundtracks, black screen. I just want to check we're doing okay. If it's still balked, somebody just kind of type it in the chat and we'll see what we can do. In this element, it is very much like a Twitch stream where you're watching part on your own content and then part on delay. But assuming all is fine, I'm going to jump on in. Great. So product management 101. For those of you who are kind of multi-years into your founder journey, please feel free to kind of interpret this as you will. Product management can mean different things in different places. But what I'm going to try and do is kind of generalize this as much as possible so that it is kind of applicable for however you like to build. And the most simple framework I can give you for what a product manager does is that product managers own questions that start with W. It sounds really basic, but in this case, I find that a basic heuristic really helps. Product managers own questions like, who is our customer? They own questions like, what problems are they having? Which are often distinct and different for what it's worth. Who a person is and what their troubles are aren't the same thing. And when people talk about TAMs, meaning general customers, they are often not the same thing as what specific problem for that group are we trying to solve. They own questions like, which problem are we trying to solve, which could also be read as, what are our priorities? Product managers own questions like, what are the critical components of a solution to that problem in terms of detailing out which parts of a problem we're trying to solve and what are the essential elements of a successful solution to that. And they own questions like, what does success look like, which are things around goals, metrics, how we're going to measure things. It's really important to kind of differentiate what product managers own. There's like a really important list of things that they don't own. Product does not own questions that start with H. And I kind of use this very importantly because the biggest screw up I see in young product managers coming into kind of tech companies is wanting to own it all. So product managers don't own questions like, how should we solve that problem? They don't own questions like, how should the solution look? There is a temptation for every PM to try and define the design into existence and define the designer's role out of it into turning this into pretty pixels. They don't own questions like, how should the solution feel? That's kind of inherently related to, but distinctly different from the idea of how does something look. They don't own questions like, how should we build it? Product managers don't select technologies. They're not here to just prescribe how we're going to solve something, whether it's an app or a mobile web page isn't really a product question as long as it delivers on the solutions. And I know that sounds somewhat controversial or heretical, but I'll talk about why. Product managers don't get to decide how long it will take to build something. It is a classic thing that happens where a product manager says, I need X and I need it by Y. It's not always possible for a product manager to make those determinations. Those are distinctly questions for engineering as to if you've given task A and resource B, how long is it going to take to deliver that? So those are like really easy abstract things to remember. I like talking to people about, is this a W question or is this an H question? Because it helps us keep everybody clear on kind of roles and responsibilities as well as keeping people to task. But how do you know if you've actually achieved it? So I'm going to try and describe at least the happy path and the sad path, and then hopefully you can kind of pattern match backwards. So the happy path for product management is a crisp articulation of the customer problem. What specifically are we trying to do when we build this product? And the reason you want that is it makes it possible for every IC working on a project to make micro optimizations. Engineers, designers, tons of people are going to make trade-offs in the day-to-day that no product manager and no founder can possibly opine on, at least not make informed opinions on. The more that everybody in the team understands specifically what we're trying to achieve, they can make a trade-off about whether or not this needs to be one flow or two screens, depending on if the problem is we need to solve this as fast as humanly possible, or if the problem is we need to make sure that we are gathering all of these different elements in order to deliver on the solution. So the first thing you've got to get to is a crisp articulation of the customer problem. The second element of that happy path is a clear set of solution requirements. And what I mean by that is literally, and I'll show you a spec later, a list of kind of requirements that the product has to deliver on before we can consider it acceptable. And the joy is that that doubles as essentially acceptance testing before you release something. We said that this product, when built, had to do these 5 things. Does it do those things? And describing requirements of what it needs to do is actually pretty different to what we should build. And that's like a really important distinction between kind of product management and product design or engineering work. And the last thing it needs to be is a clearly documented priority list, which is what are the things that we're trying to achieve in order. And the reason for that, and don't get me wrong, priorities will change all the damn time, but your goal wherever possible is to eliminate wasted cycles, that we spent a whole bunch of time working on this thing, and then we decided that actually, in order to accelerate the development of this, we don't need that. Or actually, we're going to cut scope and deliver this now, and we'll push that out into a later cycle. And if you don't have crisp priorities, you're going to end up invariably working on things that aren't the most important thing, which means it's going to kind of delay your capacity to act in an agile manner. But the second thing you'll find is that the longer you can articulate your priority list, and by longer I mean in the next 6 months, these are the most important things we're going to do, or for this feature, this is what it needs to achieve over the next year, even if we decide that we're going to ship iterations on that or versions of that upfront. For technical people especially, it will allow them to pre-plan. It stops you from painting yourselves into corners in ways that mean that your engineering team feels like it's constantly refactoring what it's doing. Or if you're constantly hearing from your dev team, that's really hard because that system can't do that, or that system was never designed for this. That's the type of flag for you that says, hey, we haven't told them, here's the plan, here's all the things we're hoping to achieve, even if it's not in V1 right now. So let's flip around. What's the sad path look like? The sad path looks like prescriptive instructions. Go and make X. And it's make X without explaining why or what you're hoping X will do. Founders, product managers, you don't have a monopoly on being right. And so the most important thing you can do is engage your entire dev, design, sales, whomever team on the type of outcome you want to achieve and let them therefore contribute to solutions. The second sad path is scope creep. It is incredibly tempting as a product manager / founder to come in and touch a prototype that the team's building, and your first instinct is to say, oh, awesome, can you also make it do X? And then a team which has been very focused on delivering a particular solution or has made technical trade-offs in order to do that is suddenly trying to add things at the last minute and is suddenly trying to change the way that kind of technical designs or kind of visual designs work. So scope creep is kind of indication that you're in the wrong path. And the last thing is thrash. Actually, I need you to stop working on A while you're like 70% of the way through it, and I need you to focus on B. And again, I don't want to kind of say that this doesn't happen, right? It happens a lot. It happens a lot when you are particularly a business that is very customer dependent or contract dependent, and so you may need to pivot often. But if you find every project you are suddenly thrashing around, it generally means you haven't articulated what problem we're trying to solve, particularly well up front, or you haven't given yourself space to interpret the problem solution requirements in the right way. And I want to throw the caveat out here, which is like, I appreciate that is really easy for a dude sitting at big company who has this clear picture in his head of product manager is distinct from designer, is distinct from dev. and that for some or many of you, these are the same thing. The first thing I'd say is, if you are all of those things, it's even more important that you first answer the W's before you start on the H's. You are super at risk of scope creep and losing sight of what you're trying to do and kind of chasing things if you are all of those things and you're just trying to do it all simultaneously. And the last one is, if you are all of the things, you've got to be clear which hat you're wearing and when. Makes it easy for people like me who wear a hat all day, every day to cover their bald patches, to literally sometimes flip my hat around if I'm trying to think about, am I solving this from an engineering perspective right now, or am I trying to solve this from a product perspective right now? So being clear about what kind of question you're answering is really helpful. And side note to that, sorry that this is suddenly so bright, is that the reason that kind of big tech companies literally write out formal documented specs for products is that they can literally advise you to do this. So this is a screenshot of, I'm not joking, the template spec that my teams use for every product that we develop. And every single time we write this, we start, a product manager goes through and answers these questions. Like, give me an overview. What are we generally trying to achieve? Give me the background of what we're running through. Define for me who the customer is. The more specific, the better everything else will be. So for us, it's like, we are here trying to solve problems for customers, landing on the homepage of Twitch for the first time ever, right? Very specific. What is the customer problem or opportunity? Again, very specific. As a customer, I don't know that Twitch has non-gaming content. Okay, great. We're really clear there. So when design is trying to think of solutions, they need to know that that's the fundamental problem we're solving. What is the customer problem or opportunity? Like, what is it a customer wants to be able to do or can't do or expected to be able to do? Again, literally, so that we can make sure that when we're looking at the kind of solution definition, we're answering that problem. My favorite question, how do you know what the customer needs or wants? Did you just pull it out of your bum? Or is this something that you have spoken to customers and you have testimony, or in previous iterations of the product, you found X? Like, what is it that convinces you that this is right and this is the thing that you should be doing? What's the most important customer benefit? Like, what is the thing that they should be able to do once this has been built? And then you get to, what does the customer experience look like? And as a product manager, at least in my experience, you're not trying to talk about what we should build. You're not drawing and doodling things. You're writing a list of statements that need to be true. As a user, I should be able to see the words non-gaming on the homepage. As a user, when I get here, I should be able to click on this and it should take me to a page that has those. As a user, I should have all these things. And then your design team is going to go and turn that into, okay, in order for this to be true, here's all the things we do. And then you hand this list and a design to a dev team and they say, great, all of this has to be true. And then they can find the right technical solution to that. And so if you're all of these things, actually going through the motions of writing this out before you start doodling, I think you'll find is really helpful for making sure you're building the right things at the end. And I know I'm tight on time, so I will run through this, but for founder PMs, it's probably the most important thing I can tell you is it's important to remember that scope is a variable and changes over time. So the first thing I'd say is the first thing you end up designing is a feature. So in this case, something like a way to list myself as a seller on a website. Then you're going to graduate up the curve to building a product. I'm not just listing myself as a seller. I need to think about the entire product detail page that happens once somebody has listed something, as well as that kind of customer side of how are they going to make transactions and what can people see. And then that scope increases again into this idea of what we call a portfolio. Somebody at some point is going to be thinking about the entire vendor side of a marketplace and how do all of the individual products and the features that make them up fit together to holistically answer the broad customer problem of, I'm a vendor and I want to sell something on the internet. And then you will also have to hold this one in your head, which is, and I'm sorry, Tip, I'm moving everything around. Eventually, you have to think about the company, right? This is Amazon. And you have to think about how do all the different elements of your portfolios and all of your products fit together. And as a founder, you're thinking about all of these simultaneously. And invariably speaking, you've got different levels of product management owning these different steps. We would think about putting really, basically the more junior on the left all the way up to you on the right. And the short answer is your job is to move to the right as soon as you can. And the thing is, once you're up there and you're just thinking about kind of portfolio problems because your teams are solving small ones or you're just solving company problems, what you'll realize is your job hasn't changed from when you were the product manager building the V1 feature. you just use really dumb words now. So instead of saying, who is our customer, you talk about your partners. Instead of saying what problems are they having, you start talking to people about your mission. Instead of talking about which problems we're trying to solve, you get up at your company all hands and you define your strategic priorities. Instead of asking what are the critical components of a solution, you talk about a 5-year plan for the different parts of your business and where you're going to invest. And instead of saying what does success look like, you're writing goals and OKRs. And because you are the fundamental product manager of your entire business, you will always be answering these questions. But the big thing is going to be this. You will always have the most experience at your company because you have always been there the longest. So you were the first PM. You have spoken to more customers than anyone else. You know how that feature fits within that product, fits within that portfolio, fits within your grand plan for everything in a way that other product managers, designers, engineers don't. As a result, you will be sorely tempted to start using words that start with H. Jump in and be like, you should just build X, or I don't know why this is taking so long, just do Y. Or when we started the company, we just did X and we found it worked really well. Don't do that, because it's way more important that you are defining for people the goals and then giving those people whose full-time job is to think about the solution, the time to actually go through and define that, because you're going to think about it for about 5 minutes. And I'll tell you, yeah, you'll probably be right 70% of the time. Because as we said, you've got more experience, you've got intuition for this, you've done it before, but nobody is going to get that intuition if you don't give them the time. And the 30% of the time you are wrong will be really freaking expensive. And eventually you're going to get to the end and be like, what the hell? Why did we ship this terrible thing? And the honest answer is, it's your fault. So wherever possible, you want to avoid the temptation to start defining for people how things should work and how we should build it and how it should look. That's not to say that you can't turn around and say, that's unacceptable that it takes that long. What are my options in terms of reducing the scope? It's not to say that you can't turn around and say, listen, this design doesn't resonate with me. Can you take another pass? It's not to say you can't hold standards and bars, but the minute you find you are telling people how things are going to have to be, you kind of hit errors. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Slightly longer than the 15 minutes I had, but hopefully we hit on the main points. Tip, I think you're still muted, mate.
Sorry, thanks for that. Okay, first question from Mike. He asks, how do you make sure new features that you roll out move the growth dial? And maybe you can give an example of a feature that you launched on Twitch, maybe with a growth lens on, and the process to how you test, iterate, and measure the value of the new features you've put out.
Sure. The most important thing you can do if you are trying to ship a feature in order to drive growth is you need to be clear that you understand why you're not growing. Like, what is the fundamental problem that is stopping customers from getting through your sign-up flow or your pipeline? So getting a clear articulation of that, which is like, hey, there's like 16 steps in our sign-up flow, and it seems like we lose tons of people, or I went and I spoke to 10 customers about what's going on, and I heard the same thing from 6 of them. Being really specific that this is the thing you're trying to solve is usually the answer to making sure it works. Because if you fundamentally improve an experience that was the problem, you should see outcomes. The other thing it allows you to do is kind of not throw darts in the dark, which is like, we're very sure this is the problem. So if we do like an iteration and it doesn't work, okay, we didn't get it right, try it again. And if you get to the second or the third iteration and it's still not happening, either you have misunderstood the problem, or there's something very wrong with the type of solution we're running down, at which point I would go back and talk to a customer again. I know that sounds like a total trope, but the idea that you can sit in isolation in your office and design stuff and ship it and it will work without watching somebody use it. There's an old Johnny Bravo cartoon of watching a person drink a glass of water where they're like sucking from the side because they don't know that the top is how you drink water. And every time we have ever shipped something, you always assume that it's super obvious that this is what you should do. And it's almost not until you see features kind of used in the wild. Simplest example of something like that I can give is people don't really come to Twitch for Twitch in general. You come to Twitch to join a community, and there's always a leader of the community, which is the streamer. And so one of the things we found was the live up notifications that say, hey, streamer X has gone live, had really crappy click-throughs. And we couldn't really work out why. And comparatively, streamers would send out messages on Discord, hey, I'm going live now, gang, and we would see tons of traffic coming through that. And we were like, this doesn't really make sense that you have to follow a streamer on a whole separate third party and turn on notifications on that other thing, but that's generating traffic for us more easily. And we spoke to a bunch of folks, and the answer was, oh, you give me random corporate speak, and it's a generic notification that comes in for every single streamer. And so I'm kind of blind to it because I follow 20 people, and it's always the same thing. Bob has gone live. So we ran a very simple experiment where we let 50 streamers write the text for the live up that goes out so that it felt authentic and it was them and it was their voice. And we saw a 250% increase in kind of notification click-throughs. So it kind of starts with this observation of problem, go and talk to customers to understand why, and then iterate as quickly as we can. And then once we had the 50 of them, we opened it up for the other 5 million.
This is a very broad question, and apologies as this is very hard to answer, but what does product management look like pre-product market fit and post-product market fit?
It's a very broad question with a very simple answer is it hopefully shouldn't look different at all. Ideally, the whole time you are trying to understand what the problem is, and you are continuing to define what solutions you need. Once obviously you've kind of stepped on that growth elevator and you've got that fit, you are then looking for either adjacent problems that that same customer is having that you think you can solve, or you are relentlessly optimizing the product that you've built in order to say, okay, so we found a thing. There's like a triangle that I would talk about, and I think we referenced it even in one of the slides on the, let me click back so that I get it exactly right. We talk about like a customer benefit triangle, which basically says you've got stable, useful, helpful, delightful. And invariably, you can find product market fit once you hit helpful, but there is always that element of delightful that you can run down. And so mainly what I'd say is it shouldn't change very much. You should still be working through those same set of questions. It's just you can decide whether you're going to keep optimizing or whether you're going to look for adjacent problems that are also true.
Nikki from Rocket Hub asks, how do you determine when you should start expanding away from your core MVP into other products or key features? What are the core determinants?
It's a really good question. And if I knew a mathematical answer to that, I think I would be way more successful at my job. Slightly earlier than you want to, slightly after you first thought of it, is the cheeky answer. Put another way, if you're talking to customers often enough, they will stop talking at some point about the thing that you want to talk about, and you will start hearing about other things. Yeah, the sign-up flow is great, but I'm having problems with X. Or yeah, that seems to be going great actually, and they're running out of things to kind of that obviously bug them. And then you can start opening up the aperture to ask them, great, what else is a problem? Don't worry about this particular thing. Like, what else is a trouble for your business? Or what else are you struggling with? Or what are the apps you're finding yourself using? And you'll start to get an understanding of their broader set of problems that you can think about expanding into. We have this a lot on Twitch where we're really lucky that we can basically wait and see what are the things that people are building hacks and workarounds into our product in order to do, and then we can just go and codify that. So Twitch is almost entirely funded by what's called subscriptions, which is viewers decide to spend $5 to $25 a month supporting the broadcaster. And we knew it was time to go into like commerce space and revenue, basically because we could see creators putting links to Patreons and their kind of Square Wallet or their PayPal on their page and saying, send me a tip. At which point we're like, wow, there must be customer demand here that says people want to give money to these people. And if people are hacking shitty third-party solutions into our product, it's time to get into that space. So there will be signals, I suspect, if you're listening to customers and asking them what's wrong.
As a founder, when is the right time to hire your first product manager? What should we ask ourselves before making that hiring decision?
Whoa, really big question. I think it is a little bit different from product to product. You can get away with not hiring a product manager for quite a while if you're talking to your dev team consistently about what that mission and vision is, and the point at which you know that your kind of lead engineers or your design team or any of it are as aware of that as you are, then you kind of don't need a small, like a junior PM sitting there watching the details if they're very aligned with the mission. The minute you feel like what's coming out of dev isn't actually solving the customer problem, or it doesn't indicate that they really deeply understand the goals, that either means you need to put more time into the dev team and talking to them, or if you can't, that's the time at which you need to find somebody who can. Mostly in my experience, there isn't a like math number. I know startups that don't have any PMs and they've got 50 people because the founder is so involved in that. But I know if there are sales heavy products or you are constantly out doing rounds and raising and you can't spend all the time with the dev team, that's about the time when you want it. There are teams where you have designers that can also pinch hit in that kind of role, because it's very kind of pre-code early phase. So it will depend a little bit on your team. And in terms of asking the question of like, how do you hire one? I joke about this with some people recently, which is like, there is no product management school or class. You learn how to be a product manager by doing. And so if you're hiring somebody, either someone who has been a PM before is great. If there's obviously a tautology there at some point, not everybody can have been a PM. There isn't actually any black magic or technical skill to being a product manager, as much as there is an understanding of who can work backwards from a what is your problem, and can I break that down, and then can I help define what we need to do. So it doesn't need to be that you've done this in a technical capacity before. It doesn't need to be that you've worked with design and engineering to do that. Somebody who can tell you that they spotted a problem and they broke that down into the underlying causes, and then they broke that down into a series of things that we need to do to solve it, can be trained to be a product manager. It just depends how much time you have to spend with them.
Cool. Tom, you once said, my team's job is to try and mechanically create serendipity in orders of hundreds of millions. And you were talking about building this new search engine for discovering new content, but with that uncertainty of live streaming as well, which is a completely new challenge. So a broader question here is, which could apply to lots of different founders as well, doing something very new and very hard, is when there's no existing product roadmap that you can copy, how do you go about planning and attacking a novel problem?
Yeah. So this one's really hard. It's why so many people go and copy successful features elsewhere. I think the best answer I can give you is you have to start by understanding why the existing solutions don't work. When we made the decision, which sounds insane, to go and say, great, we should just build our own search engine that is going to be different. But in order to understand why, we had to go back and say, what's the fundamental problem with what we have? And so we came to this realization, which was like, most Twitch channels are offline most of the time. Even if you broadcast 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, you are by definition only live 33% of the time. And we're a live streaming site. So getting to an offline channel is like sad. It's like fail, even though mostly what a search engine would be gold on is how do you direct somebody to the place they wanted to go? And in our case, it's like sometimes the place you want to go is very bad. And so we had to ask ourselves the flip side question, which is like, how would you design Google differently if 2 out of the 3 times you search for the New York Times, all you could really do is confirm that, yes, the New York Times exists, but you can't read anything, please come back later. And so trying to be clear on what the problem is really helps kind of take a bunch of the noise out into, okay, none of the existing solutions worked because they don't solve this thing or this thing or this thing, and then trying to get a sense of what's missing. And then you'll still fail most of the time when you're building new stuff. It's just like true. And then when you do fail, you've got to ask yourself quickly, did we get the iteration wrong? Did we get the timing wrong? Like, it's a good solution for the problem, but kind of not enough people have this type of phone, or not enough people are doing this type of behavior yet. Or did you just misunderstand the problem? And you can only ever really understand that by trying a couple iterations and talking to customers as you go about why they didn't like it or why they didn't use it or why it wasn't working. Unless you can get really good at tracking as to where users fell off in different pipelines or where they fell across in the customer journey.
Cool. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Jeff asks, although product managers covers the W's and not the H's, there's still technical, engineering, and design understanding involved. How does a product manager develop that understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. Once you've started with, I want this to be true, when you don't know those things, you will probably start more broadly. So you'll start with, oh, there just needs to be a place where I can find all this stuff, and there needs to be a button somewhere on the homepage that can do it, and it needs to be obvious. And then the more time you spend with development teams, you will learn how they go about doing that. And then you kind of, the first way you pick it up is broad osmosis there that says, here's what's kind of how we solved those problems in the past. So next time you'll know, oh, this is a backend change in order to do that. Or actually, when we tried to do this with notifications last time, iOS doesn't actually allow you to do those things because of the way the Apple monopoly works. So you know that that's not likely a solution. The other way to do it is before you get to a formal spec like this, you grab an engineer, you grab a designer, and you sit down and say, I'm thinking of building a thing. I need to solve this problem. Let me ask you some dumb questions. Let me kind of brainstorm with you here that says, is this possible? Is that possible? Can we do these things? And you have to be really willing to look stupid. Because in my experience, engineers and designers are totally fine working with non-technical people as long as they are confident in what that person is trying to achieve and they feel like that person really believes in it and they have evidence for it and we've kind of articulated the problem well. In a lot of ways, being super technical is actually a real risk because you keep pivoting back into the H's because you think like you know. And so sometimes blissful ignorance of, I don't understand how this works. I just know that there needs to be service A that tells object B, yes, this theme is live, is like a blessing.
Awesome. The last question is around your insights into the future of play. So the situation the whole world is in right now has been such a big catalyst for mainstream to adopt live stream as a new way to interact and entertainment, as we are doing with Giants Conference right now. So from your point of view, what are the untapped potentials of live streaming and what could become more of this?
I think the short answer is I think that we will find that just about everything can be done remotely. There are absolutely some things that will require face-to-face contact, but most things can be done remotely. The difficulty is I don't think people miss necessarily being in a physical office. I think what people miss is a sense of community. And so I think we've built social products historically off of here's your real world community, and now we'll make it possible for you to engage them from afar. I suspect the next wave of products are going to be about if I'm going to be remote generally, and that's going to be things that are long-term, how is it that I can go to a place and build community there with people that I didn't know in real life and start feeling like it's community? So online meetups like this are true. I can see a comment in chat, which is around like kind of Fortnite concerts and Travis Scott, which is totally a thing. You can see kind of little startups popping up here around things like Clubhouse where people are just sitting and chatting about ideas. That's mostly VCs just talking about each other. So I wouldn't recommend that one particularly, but the idea that you can build community and social network that isn't just exporting your real life into digital, I think is the next wave.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. That was incredibly useful, super practical tips. That was awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Sadly, that's the end of the Giants Conference, but I have an exciting announcement for everyone, so stick around. Tom, you're now off to the StartMate Q&A, so thank you so much for your presentation and being here.
Wonderful. Thanks, gang. Have a great day.
Yeah. Okay, guys, so we've had insanely positive feedback from everyone. Thank you so much for your emails, your social posts, sharing notes, engagement. Chat has been off the chain, so it's so awesome. There's just something really magical about us all coming together every day and learning together. So we want to do more of what's working. So announcement is we will be launching the Giants weekly. So the idea was literally floated yesterday, so there's no real details around it. It'll probably be one session each week, extremely high caliber speakers talking about their area of expertise. So if you want to keep posted on these sessions, just sign up to our newsletter by heading to blackbird.vc and scroll down to the bottom of the website and just enter your email address there, or just follow us on Twitter at BlackbirdVC. We'd also love to improve these sessions as well. Love your feedback and how we can make it more interactive or use some of the stuff Tom has said in terms of other tools we can use to make you guys chat more amongst each other as well. And we'll be sending that feedback form out shortly. So if you guys love us enough, then we'll go ahead and do it. A massive thank you to our team at Blackbird, especially Joel, Danny, Sam, Mason, Lainey, and Clark, and the team at StartMate as well, Michael, Sasha, and Sophia. Thanks to our awesome community partners. And of course, thank you to you guys for engaging and learning and heading out there to do something incredible with your lives as well. So until next time, stay strong and let's all emerge as giants. Have an awesome weekend, guys. Bye.